Okay, ladies and gentlemen, it is 6:18 p.m. We're reconvening from closed meeting. If you would please, if you rise for the pledge and the invocation. Pledge to the United States flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Now the Texas flag. Honor the Texas flag. I pledge allegiance to thee, Texas, one state, under God, one and indivisible. Now the invocation will begin by Melissa Crutcher, Board Trustee.
If you would, bow your heads, please. Lord, thank you for this opportunity for us to come together tonight. First, we want to say our hearts go out to our neighbors who have been impacted tremendously by the storms today. We ask that you watch over their families, the community members, the teachers, the students, everyone in that community. Keep them safe and healthy and just help them rebuild to what they need to so that they can continue to thrive as a community. Lord, we ask that you watch over our students, watch over Porte ISD as a whole, our teachers, our educators, our staff, our students, and everything that they do every day, but keep them safe and healthy. And thank you for the blessings today and watching over us and continue to do so. Help us to make the decisions that will be the best benefit for our students and guide us in all that we do. And it's your name we pray. Amen.
Thank you. We'll go to item 5, public comments. The board will now hear those who wish to make comment completed and returned the public comment participation request. This section will be conducted in accordance with the Texas Open Meetings Act and board policy. Complaints and concerns for which other resolution channels are provided shall be directed through those channels. Mr. Shoppy, do we have any?
No, we don't.
Okay, thank you. Okay, we go to item 6, workshop and bond planning discussion. Financial overview by Doug Witt, Senior Managing Director, Samco Capital Markets. Okay.
Eddie, can we get this switched over to our, perfect. All right. Yes, we have a couple things outlined for you tonight, actually 3 things. So first up will be Mr. Witt. He's with Samco Capital. He is our financial advisor, so he's going to spend some time talking to you a little bit about our bond capacity and how we look in our financial state as we move to the possibility of calling for this bond for a May election. Part 2, we have Ms. Ronna Johnson here tonight to talk to us a little bit about our bond campaign, our messaging, and our strategy, again, as we approach getting in front of you February 7th, and then later, obviously, with campaigning to push the bond. And then lastly, I'll be giving a brief overview of the 3 propositions and kind of showing you each item within those propositions, and then obviously a dollar figure for you to look at. And in the end, we'll kind of open it up for questions and so forth. So I'll open it up, let Mr. Witt come up. Doug, thank you for being here. I know we've been dealing with the weather, but you came in on a boat, so that's good.
All right, good evening. It's good to be back. Appreciate the opportunity. Normally when they hand me these, I click on the wrong thing and the screen goes away and we start back over. But I think I've got it tonight. So it's good to be back. We appreciate the opportunity to be here. Feel free to stop me at any time with questions. I'm going to cover several different topics, several different slides, and I like questions as we go. Of course, we'll have questions at the end as well. All right, so the first spot where we start is what's going on in markets. So we deal with the bond market, we deal with interest rates, etc. So you see a graph. On this graph is what's called the Bond Buyers Index of Municipal Bonds. It's a national index. It's put out weekly by the bond buyer. The graph dates back to January of 2001, so I call it a modern history of interest rates. You can see at the top, in 2008 was the historical high at 6%. That was the Wall Street meltdown, the liquidity crisis, the housing market crisis, the precursor to the Great Recession, as they called it. The average runs across the middle in blue at 4%, and the record low level occurred in August of 2020, following the pandemic and then massive market intervention by the federal government. And then, of course, we're all familiar with what we've read in the financial news here recently, that interest rates began coming up with federal policy, Federal Reserve policy, etc. Now, what you continue to read about in the news today is the Federal Reserve wants to raise interest rates. They control the federal funds rate, which is a short-term interest rate. Our medium to long-term bond rates have settled down. In fact, this has come down since this chart was put out to about a 335. That number there is 365. I sold bonds today in the market that will be approved by the Board of Trustees tomorrow. It was a 30-year bond. It was an average interest rate of 3.75%, to put this in perspective. So 3.75%, just like this chart indicates, is we are in interest rate market that is below average, slightly below average. So sometimes people say interest rates are going up, there's a crisis and things are going bad. That is simply not the case. We're basically to normal rates, slightly below average rates in today's market. By the way, when you see these periods, the V's in the market and these record low levels, you'll see that we refund bonds, and I'll have that slide momentarily. Here's a look at your bond election history. You have Ms. Johnson here tonight to guide you through all things related to this, but we put it together as part of an information packet so that people can see when the election was, what the vote count was, and y'all have a strong history of passing your bond elections here. Although they're relatively infrequent bonds, it was 9 years between 2005 and 2014, and now here we are 8 or 9 years since the last one, and that's a pretty good length of time for a Texas school district to go without a bond election. Let me just check here. So recent bond ratings, the reason we put this up is people want to know how the world views your district as an investment opportunity, because when you need a facility improvement, we have to take those bonds into the open market and sell it to investors, both institutional and retail. And so your recent bond ratings, of course, AAA based upon the permanent school fund guarantee, and I'll speak to that momentarily. But you have underlying credit quality of very, very high category, AA2 and AA. By Moody's Investor Service and S&P or Standard & Poor's Global Rating. So ratings go AAA, AA, single A, triple B, or BAA. You're in the next highest category. Your prior bonds were sold with the AAA rating. That's based upon the permanent school fund guarantee. What the permanent school fund guarantee does is it ensures to the investor that if any local school district in the state of Texas does not make its payment on the principal and interest of the bonds, it will step in and pay the investor. So the investor has basically a risk-free investment. With that said, the permanent school fund has reached its capacity under the Internal Revenue Service private letter ruling, as they call it. There is federal legislation that is being filed. There is discussions with the IRS about raising that limit. This is the third time in the history of the program that it reached its capacity under the law, had to go back and get a renewed capacity. I'm cautiously optimistic that we will get the permanent school fund back. But in the meantime, we're selling bonds with underlying credit ratings, and you have a very good one. So I was asked earlier if anything has changed since the last set of analysis. The answer is no, because we're pricing these bonds pretty close to the AAA rating, and the fact that you have a good credit quality in this district is an advantage going into a situation where we're having an election without the permanent school fund backing. So what do the analysts cite about the financial condition of the district? Large and growing tax base with moderate concentration. That's no surprise here. We have some concentration in petrochemicals. Access to the Houston broad economic and employment base, strong wealth and income levels among your constituents here, and then strong reserves. So again, I'm not overly concerned about the lack of the permanent school fund guarantee. I've sold 3 bonds in the past 2 weeks, 1 with the permanent school fund and 2 without, and we did just fine.
So Doug, just for clarification, the board didn't do anything to go from AAA to AA. It's just based on the permanent school fund.
Exactly. The permanent school fund is what we call an enhanced rating, and the AA2 is what we call an underlying rating. If you did a bell curve on Texas school districts, the peak of that bell curve would be at a credit quality below what you have here. So you're on the upper end where there's fewer districts that have that high of credit quality in the state of Texas. Historical refunding and redemption, I talked about the graph where interest rates get low. 2021 is one where we had record low levels. The district took the opportunity to refinance existing bonds at the time in which we could do it and produce $17.7 million of savings. So these models that you see from us look like they're static models on paper and on spreadsheets and on graphs, but they're actually dynamic models, and including in this district. But basically, we do debt management process over time. Since 2014, there's been $32 million of proactive refinancing of existing bonds at the appropriate times to bring down the borrowing cost of outstanding bonds, creating bond capacity for this district on a go-forward basis. Here's your outstanding debt service. In addition to refunding bonds because interest rates are low, we've actually built up and taken advantage of your tax base, collected money, and used it to prepay on principal and pay bonds off early. So it wasn't refinancing at a lower rate, it was actually debt management to pay off principal faster than you ever could have thought that you would back when you held the election 5 or 10 years in advance. So again, that's a significant amount of debt management there. And so this talks about what does our profile look like of principal and interest payments. I call it the coral snake graph, but each of those colors are a series of bonds or a series of refunding bonds. And to say the least, this is a beautiful profile to be undertaking a facility improvement program. We have a big drop-off in debt service, we have more drop-offs in debt service, and we only go out to 2039. So basically 15 years principal and interest. Most of our school districts in Texas, this chart will go out to 2050. And in many cases, it's flat and level at this point going straight across. So the only way that we can add bonds and do facility improvements is stack bars on top of it, and stacking bars on top of it means you have to raise your tax rate. In this case, we have built-in bond capacity. Now we can talk about the language that goes on about it momentarily and how to deal with that, but we have bond capacity where you do not have to raise your tax rate in this district, and it's because of this profile that we have here where you've managed your bonds and principal amounts outstanding in a good fashion over time. So that's a starting point. That's a great place to start for me. It makes my life a lot easier. So here's another thing that makes my life easier in this district is your taxable value history. So at the top of the graph, and I don't know if y'all can see that in the back, but at the top of the graph in 2005, 2006, you had a $4.5 billion tax base. And since then, it's gone up to $6 billion. You'll see some cases in here, this year here at 210. I'm guessing this is the red button, the laser? Yep. So right here, there was one fluctuation downward. We have to be careful of that in this style of district where the petrochemical businesses values can go up or down depending on what's going on in the economy. We have to protect against that. But basically, you have been northbound in the amount of taxable value growth that you have. These businesses are expanding, they're growing, they're coming to you for what we call Chapter 313 value limitation agreements. And so they want to do business here, and they expand your taxable value for INS purposes while they get a tax break on the maintenance and operating side for them, and it doesn't cost you anything to give them that break under Texas law. So we get the value for purposes of improving our facilities through voted bonds, and it's a win-win for both the school district and the business on our 313 agreements that we have. Now, this may or may not be renewed in the session that we have now. It's going to be interesting. I think it has been a major economic development tool for the state of Texas, not just in your area, but in some of our other areas as well. It's been amazing for reinvestment in our public school infrastructure. So I hope they renew it, but it is under debate. So with that said, though, your taxable value for INS purposes in 05-06 was $4.5 billion. Today it's $14 billion. Okay, so that is another thing that makes our discussions today much easier than our discussions in many other districts where they don't have this and they don't have the declining debt service. So they're looking at trying to do a facility and it's going to cost 30-cent tax rate increase, or they just simply don't have the capacity to build the facilities that they need. We don't have that problem here. I hope your voters recognize that. So with that said, the one thing that we need to be careful of is under these 313 agreements, when they make the agreement with you, they give a value and then they show value depreciation. So I can't just assume that they're going to give us all the value and then it's going to stay there forever. I have to build in some safety nets for you so that we keep our promises to the voters with respect to our tax rate. So this chart just shows with these 313 agreements, so each of these are a 313 agreement. We show how it adds value up and it going out to 2025, and then we show the built-in depreciation that comes down. So we will build this into our model. It's not nearly as dramatic on this page. Keep in mind that the scale here is $2 billion, okay? The scale on the bond graph is $14 billion, okay? So, but just know that we are keeping an eye on this right here to make sure that we keep the promises to our voters. So big increases, shown depreciation. In reality, it probably won't depreciate like this, and you'll probably outperform any of the assumptions that we make in our model. Tax rate and fund balance history. So maintenance and operating tax base, column 2, $1.50 compressed by law down to $1.04. You were at $1.04, and then you had a temporary increase here back to $1.04, and then we began the second round of mandatory statewide tax compression. Yours has gone from $1.04 to 97.5 cents. It's going to continue. I mean, I mean, there's legislation now, property tax reduction is on the agenda in Austin as we speak. Exactly. So anything that we're talking about today is actually going to be better to the taxpayer because they're going to get mandatory compressions here. So when I talk about no tax rate increase here, they're going to actually do better than that. They're going to see property tax reduction. We've already seen it with a rise in the homestead exemption. So many of you may know that our homestead exemption went from $25,000 to $40,000. There's proposals now for that to go to $70,000. So there's a continuation of property tax reduction in the state of Texas through proposals for the homestead exemption going up and continuing to go up, taking away taxable value to the homeowner, and then also the compression here on the maintenance and operating side. So when I talked about before the elections that we've had and how we've performed, back here you told your taxpayers a 12-cent increase. You were there for 2 years. It went down to 38 to 34. You're down to 28 cents from what they actually saw and approved in your last election. You've outperformed in your tax rate discussions with your voters through your bond elections on your interest in sinking fund side, and that's illustrated here. We plan to do the same. We're going to talk about no tax rate increase. 5 years from now, we're going to be at or below that number. All right. INS fund balance, it's been built up because you managed your tax rate, got up to a big number, allowed us to pay down on bonds through refinancing and early redemption. We brought it down here and it's starting to grow back up. So this will be another area of conservatism in the model that we can use for the facility and capital improvements that you have before you. By the way, I'm not sure it's going to be a factor here, Ms. Johnson, but in many of our districts, when we talk about pass ratios, there's been a little bit of voter sentiment turn against schools and school bond elections. Some of that is rising property values. What your constituents don't know is that the rising property values that are assessed by the appraisal district, we don't have control over, nor do we get that money. We get paid on the number of students that we have, okay? We get paid on the number of students we have, so if our property values go up, who gets that money? State of Texas. And the state of Texas is sitting on a pile of cash. So we're asking our voters to please recognize that there are property tax reduction bills in play because the state has been collecting that money from those appraised value increases. So if you polled your constituents and you said, how many of you know that the value of your home has gone up in the state of Texas, you're going to get 99% say, yes, I know that. If you polled your constituents and said, how many of you know that your tax rate has declined on the maintenance and operating side, it's going to be closer to 50% maybe, okay? How many know that the homestead exemption has gone up and it's going to go up again? It might be closer to 50%. So there's a discrepancy between what our voters know in bad news and what our voters know in good news. And that's what we have to communicate. The other things that we always have to communicate is that we have no control here. It's given to us by law on the maintenance and operating side. The INS side cannot hurt what you do on your operations and how you pay your employees and how you run your programs. It can only help. How can it help in this district? Well, if we're paying for some of our rolling replacement items on the INS side, which is for voted bonds, which this tax rate is dedicated solely to the repayment of voted bonds, then moving items that would otherwise be in the budget on the M&O side to the INS side can actually help the maintenance and operating budget and the general operating side. So if someone says, you can't vote for these bonds because we're not using the money right on the maintenance and operating side, that's a false way to view this. Voted bonds can only help the INS side. We can only use that for facility improvements and capital items, and any capital items that come from here to here actually help this side. And this budget, the board can tell you, we have very little discretion. It's a state funding formula subject to recapture. We only have so many dollars. Those dollars, 80% go to personnel. There's limited discretion in this budget, and depending on the winners and losers out of legislative sessions, it can be good times or bad times, but not many people are expecting great times with respect to that side. So the bottom line is voting for the bonds is not a vote against what you're trying to do on the other side. Texas school bond elections, we go back to 2018. This is aggregated annually. We can have a May and a November. We can break down all of these statistics if you want to. But what we show on this page is in 2018, we had 104 elections totaling $11 billion presented to voters for public school infrastructure. The pass ratio was 83% to 17% on an annual basis. 19, same thing, 78% to 22%, $15 billion presented to voters. 2020 obviously was an anomaly. We had canceled an almost entire section. The other November election was very small, very modest. Some people were ready to go in May and couldn't, and they just did it reluctantly here. But it still passed pretty decent, 80% to 20%. 9 billion is a pretty good number for that circumstance. Then we came out in 2021, 73%, 27%. That's a historical average for our proposition, particularly our primary proposition. But you can see the 15.8 billion. Again, when you start talking about, 235 million, it is one small fraction of what's going on in the state of Texas. The state of Texas is massively growing. We have aging infrastructure, and schools must reinvest in their school system. So then we get to 2022, and this is where we start seeing a little bit of voter sentiment change. Now, there's a slide in here. Yes, we now have to have mandatory, what I call down ballot propositions. So stadium with seating, an auditorium, whatever a recreational facility is. To be honest, school districts do not build recreational facilities. We build extracurricular facilities, and extracurricular is a completely different name than recreational. I consider that an insult from Austin to our local school districts. Performing arts facilities, which are different than auditoriums, teacher housing, and then technology equipment. So that some of these will come into play for you. But the point is that this is a relatively new law, and so we have down ballot propositions. So we have to talk about past all or some propositions being at 58%. What we know from the very last cycle, that our primary proposition is getting back to the normal pass percentage of about 70%. Our down ballot propositions are much lower, they're closer to 50%. If you kind of aggregate it up between May and November here, you can see the difference between the 70 and the 58. Some of it is down ballot proposition, some of it's voter sentiment, but I think we're recapturing some of our voter sentiment back, particularly with the economic activity and with knowledge that property tax reduction is coming out of Austin. If anyone's turned on the news at all, you know that it's coming. So the required propositions I mentioned earlier, there is a embarrassing typographical error here. It says rate in there. That is not true. The required ballot, it says this is a tax increase. And we distinguish between a tax rate, no tax rate increase in this case, and the required ballot language that says this is a tax increase. So if we settle in on this is a no tax rate increase bond election, we're going to have to work with Ms. Johnson and your team to make sure that the voters understand that the ballot language says this is a tax increase. Why they want us to put it on there, we know. They don't necessarily like us passing at 75%. But to say this is a tax rate increase would be inaccurate. So they just stuck with this is a tax increase. You have a no tax rate increase bond election potentially. If you go that route, you're going to have to explain it because people will, on Facebook and in other places, tell you they're lying. The state's telling us that they're lying. We're not lying. We can do this with no tax rate increase. I can prove it up. In fact, there's going to be probably a tax rate decrease when it's all said and done, when they compress the maintenance and operating side and we maintain the level on the INS side. So preliminary bond program analysis, of course, where we come in and we start looking at what is our bond capacity at various assumptions. So the parameters that we're using for this model, and we've been working with the administration now for quite some time talking about these items, but where we stand is we're assuming May of 23 is your bond election. We have the baseline taxable value at 12 billion. And what we refer to as baseline taxable value is not including those 313 agreements that are new and coming at you and going to be added to that value. So we put in just a small growth of 1% per year for 5 years on your baseline taxable value. If you looked at last year's growth, it would be way, way north of that. So just a modest growth assumption. Total taxable value assumed to be 14 billion in 22-23, including the 313 agreements. And then we depreciate those over time, as I showed in that first schedule. The collection percentage, we use 98%. You probably collect a little more than that on a total basis. Early redemption, we're probably going to pay off some more bonds early out of that INS fund balance that we have. And then we have the 28 cents, and we're assuming in this model no INS tax rate increase. So we work backwards from no INS tax rate increase to what's the bond capacity under those assumptions. And we come up with the facility improvement component of your program, assumed to be issued in 3 installments. So 80 million, 70 million, 70 million. What's the beauty of that? The beauty of that is that I become 1 year smarter every year. And what I mean by that is there's assumptions in here about next year and the year after that and the year after that. Well, in this process, it will no longer be an assumption. It'll be a real piece of data that we can adjust our model to, our dynamic model to make sure that we keep the promise of the tax rate. So here we're using 25 years, 24 years, 23 years. Texas law allows up to 40 years. New construction oftentimes is 30 years in non-property wealthy districts that have to stretch their bonds out longer. We have an assumed 10-year early optional redemption. We may have some bonds that are callable sooner than that. And then we're assuming an interest rate of 4.85%. That now is ultra conservative. As I mentioned earlier, we've been working with the district now for some time, kind of building these models. At one time, that graph was northbound on the interest rate, and we didn't know where it was going to stop. It stopped, it turned around, it came back down. So this is almost a full percentage point conservative. We would run many of our models, at 50 to 75 basis points conservative. It's probably about a full percentage point today. So that's the 220 million. And then we basically in the model, even though we have a singular bond issuance style of process, we break out that which is rolling replacement bonds. We can prove up to if anyone comes to you and says, why are you doing long 25-year bonds for 3-year technology? Tell them we're not. Can't do it under the law. We're not doing it. We can vote it. But when we sell bonds, we're going to amortize the technology bonds over a very short period of time, and we're going to amortize the facility bonds over a normal period of time. So here you can see that we have 15 million issued, 3 million 5 times. So 23, 25, 27, 29, 31. You did this in your last bond issue. It was actually a 10-year plan. And again, I can assume this, but if I get a call that says we need something in 2024, we're going to have the flexibility to do that. If we get a windfall of money that says we can buy our computers with that, and we don't need the bond money until 27, we can skip the 25 issue. It's a very, very flexible model is my point to this. So assumed to be 2 years for each installment. So again, a very quick payback. Interest rate of 3.25 is plenty cushion for that style of bond. What does it look like graphically? So here in the dark color, we have our outstanding with that big drop off here and fade here. Here we layer in yellow, orange, and red, the 3 installments of the 220 million facility bonds. In blue, we stack in the 2-year amortization 5 times of the technology bonds. Here is a sizable increase in green to the INS fund balance, which again, we're likely to pay off some principal bonds of the prior one. We'll do analysis and say, do we want to use it to pay off some of these bonds, or do we want to use it to amortize these bonds? But that's a technical detail that we'll deal with. And again, we allow the value to go up with the 313 agreements, and then we fade that down here. So that's a protection of you if we get some declining values in that.
You may anticipate that
Pardon me?
declining values, we anticipate declining values.
I really don't. We see it on paper where they put in these depreciations. If we were talking about a 313 agreement on a solar farm or a wind farm, the answer is yes, they depreciate very rapidly. Our experience has been that they build these plants and they use them and they continue to use them and they get more value to them as they go. So we're monitoring or mimicking their application and their stated values, not our anticipation. And because this is a multi-year, multi-phase bond program for technology and for facilities, we have all kinds of flexibility that this bond model that I can prove up bond capacity of the type that you need to do the facility improvements that y'all have identified and prioritized. I can prove up mathematically that it's a no-brainer that we can do it at the 28 cents that we're at currently. And that's what we're doing with this model. If this actually gets accelerated where some of these are actually paid in here because we're up here, that's going to be fine too. But it will be a dynamic model that we adjust. And to the point, again, I get smarter every year that goes by because I get another tax base, another valuation of our 313s, et cetera. So that is the 220 million plus 220 million plus the 15 million. Again, on a conservative analysis, just to prove that up. And so with that, I'll answer any questions about any of the slides. If not, then I'll turn it over to Mr. Bromley.
Boyd, do you have any questions?
I got a question.
Try to speak to the mic.
Oh, that's right. Okay, on the slide that is up right now, just for clarification for the board and for anyone who might be watching this presentation, we would be, at this point, unless we pay down bonds earlier, we would be extending our debt for approximately 9 to 10 years.
Yes, to 2038. You're filling in this fading gap?
Uh-huh.
So, yes.
If the bond were to pass, though, we would be extending it an extra,
Well, you're going to, yes, from here to here, yes.
okay,
Technically speaking, we don't have to necessarily, depending on how things go. This is just a model. I could actually take these bars and layer them up and go right here. And that's something that we'll make after the election every time we issue bonds as to what the structure is. But yes, technically speaking, we have a very, very small amount compared to where we are of payments in 40 through 48 because the facility improvements that you're doing are long-range facility improvements that would last well beyond this period here.
okay. And a couple of slides back,
What I like about this is that we're taking this big drop off and we're filling it in, not having to raise our tax rate.
Yes.
And you're reinvesting that money in your school system.
yes, sir.
That again, to be clear, I don't have this model in many places.
Thank you.
Which slide?
One more back? One more, maybe. Well, okay, no, go forward. I'm sorry, I missed it. It was, the one where we were talking about the estimated percentage of growth on the tax base.
Yes, that's here.
And you estimated it at, I believe, 1%.
Yeah, it was just a modest 1%.
And what has it been, average over the last 5 years? Do you know?
Percentage-wise, I may not have that, but you can do the math by taking these values. For example, 600 million divided by 6.7 billion is about 10%.
Okay,
Okay? A billion divided by 8 billion is a much bigger percentage than that.
right.
This last year, you grew another $1 billion.
So 1% is extremely modest.
That's correct.
In your estimate there?
That is correct.
Okay. That was my point. I knew it was growing way, way higher rate than that, so.
Yes, and
So why did you pick 1% to base that on, as far as us using that for educational purposes when we're speaking to the public?
we picked it because we don't really need it to show what you're doing. Y'all are limiting yourself to facility improvements that are relatively modest for your means.
Okay,
And so if I were in any other district, I would be taking the exact percentage over the past 5 years of what you've had, and I would be using that and having a bond model that has stacking payments each and every year, growing at 10%.
But we don't need to do
I
that
don't have
because
to
of,
do, exactly, I don't
the
have to
shape
do
that we're
that
in.
here.
Okay,
So I
perfect.
put it into the model, just to show that we think about it. It wasn't a prediction, it was, you know, we're growing here in Texas, we're growing here in LaPorte, and so this is just a modest assumption.
Okay,
And
awesome.
this is now a very, very conservative assumption.
Right, because you just mentioned when you first started speaking that you just sold today a 30-year bond at 3.75.
That's correct.
Correct. Okay.
That is correct. So everything that you're seeing about this model is conservative and flexible.
That's awesome.
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much.
I have a question, Doug. So, basic assumption is that we're not raising the tax rate, which is great. And that, if I heard it right, that we could potentially even be less than, once the values gets compressed, it could be lower than what they're currently paying now. Which again, that's a hugely favorable. You pointed out, I think it was the chart with the taxable value. There was an anomalous year from 2009 and 10 where it went down, and then that coincides with our last recession, right? So my
Yes.
question is, I know you have very conservative numbers in here.
That's exactly
If
right.
we were to have a year or two of adjustments or it goes down, are you still comfortable we can do this bond without having to raise it?
Without a doubt. And that's a great point. I have to build a bond model that can withstand all economic times, and we've done it here. So I've got to deal with recessions and booms, high inflation, low inflation, high unemployment, low unemployment. We have to deal with all of that. And so here, all of the conservatism that you see in there allows me to deal with this. And so if you just go to the model, just visually, you can see that if push came to shove, which I don't think it will, but if push came to shove, this yellow, this orange, and this red, there's so much room out here. It's remarkable. I just don't need it to do what y'all need to do.
Is there a way to, I think that's an amazing thing. I just think that, let's put myself in those shoes, like the average citizen, getting them to understand, is there ways you can help us to be able to convey that to the public in such a way that we understand that we could hit some harder times, right, than we've been accustomed to the last decade, but the way we have this structured, we feel comfortable and safe that it's still not going to go and affect your tax rate.
Yeah, and we'll work with Ms. Johnson to do that, but this is a multi-phase bond program, meaning that there's issuances over time. So we'll get 3 years into this program, and we'll know where we stand so that we can build a model with all the protections that you need. So again, I talk about it being what looks like a static model, right? Everything here is just static. But the reality is this bar here was accelerated because we could. It was out here at one time, and we got into good times, and so we accelerated. The same is true of bad times. If we have to, and this has to come down a little bit to keep the tax rate at 28 cents, and we have to put a stack here, that won't be a problem.
Can you also, the only other thing I really didn't understand, my ignorance, is the rolling, the $15 million, there's a 220, and another subset was $15 million. Can you explain what that $15 million is?
Yes, so part of your facility and capital improvement plan is technology. And so it'll have to be on its own proposition, as we talked about in those specific propositions. And the way this works is you buy technology in 23, for example, $3 million worth of technology equipment. 2 years later, you give it back or sell it or whatever you do with technology that has run its course, and you reinvest $3 million again. And so it's what we call a rolling replacement, meaning that, you know, again, I don't know how long your technology is. 2 years seems a little bit conservative to me, but so if you bought a third, let me try it this way. If you bought a third of your technology every 3 years, by the time you got to the third year, you would be taking the first set of technology and giving it back and buying a new one. So it rolls. So we pay off the technology that is expiring, and then we reissue and rebuy as it's expiring because we have the capacity and the placeholder for that. So we're paying off everything else before, and that's why we call it rolling replacement. It's rolling replacement on the technology, and it's rolling replacement on the bonds.
Is it a lower interest rate because of the term on it? It's like a
It
shorter
is.
term?
It is. Our yield curve's pretty flat now, but that's still a very conservative for 2 years. But yes, a 2-year bond, generally speaking, is going to have a lower interest rate than a 15 or 25 or 30-year bond. That's correct.
Is there any room for, I have that in something that, the way that's set every 2 years, so say we have an influx of students, and we have need additional technology in between that time period, or we have something where a lot of technology is lost, and we need to move forward and give additional, is it set where we can't do it?
No, you will have the opportunity. In fact, your last one was just like that. We had a set amount of bond. It wasn't just for technology, it was for a lot of capital items, which include, I believe, HVAC systems, for example. But I think to show the flexibility when the pandemic hit and then HVAC could be paid out of grant money, we didn't have to use it for that, and it was redirected to other capital items. So that's the flexibility that you as the board will have each and every year that we go through this process in the budget and in the bond issuance. Yeah. And it's designed to be flexible. If you need to accelerate, we accelerate. If we need to decelerate, we can decelerate on both the facilities and the technology.
Other questions, board?
Thank y'all very much.
Thank you.
Mike's here. Let me change this. Don't you hang on. All right, we got Ms. Johnson up next. She's going to come spend some time and talk to you a little bit about our marketing campaign and what that will look like as far as how we're going to sell this to the community and the different items that we're going to focus on. So I'm going to pass this over to her, and then I'll get her presentation.
Okay, thank you. Well, good evening, President Yonda, Board of Trustees, and Dr. Jackson. Thank you so much for having me tonight. I'm really excited to be here. We were here last week with our team, and we've already launched a process. So I'm looking forward tonight to sharing with you our process and some of the things about Advantage and what we'll be doing for the Porte Independent School District. So Advantage, I actually am the CEO and founder of Advantage. I'll tell you a little bit about me. I started out, I have a degree from Texas A&M in marketing and went off to Dallas and worked at Neiman Marcus in the buying offices. And after had 2 or 3 kids, 3 as a matter of fact, we decided to move down to Georgetown. And when I got there, all of the moms did PTA. So I quickly realized that my skills in strategic planning and the more financial aspects were more suited to doing district performance councils, strategic planning, campus improvement plans, and I also got into PTA. So I was a PTA president elementary. I started a PTA at a high school as a PTA council president, was then later arm twisted to be the president of the high school PTA. I also was Partners in Ed chair, started an education foundation with a group of folks and did grants for a while. In the meantime, we did Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts, church, boosters, you name it. But in 2005, when I was president of the PTA council, I got asked to serve on a bond committee, and my oldest child at that time was in the 3rd grade. So I really didn't have a background for what a bond election even was. So joined that community group, just like you're working with now. And when it was done, I chaired the PAC at that time. That first bond that I did in Georgetown as a parent actually built the first phase of a second high school with Huckabee. And so that went on to be Eastview High School. And the second bond that I worked, chairing the bond committee and then chairing the PAC in 2010, built the rest of that high school. My daughter, by the way, ended up being the first graduating class a split high school. So I had a lot of fans and a lot of people who weren't fans in that process. And I learned a lot. I learned a lot about community engagement, learned about relationships. And then after that, I started working with Scott Milder, who you guys might know from Friends of Texas Public Schools. And I've also worked with Huckabee and a lot of large architecture firms around the state. But in 2012, I became a board member. The board president in Georgetown ISD at that time was ready to roll off. He asked me to take his place. So I came on at a really tough time during a recession. We were riffing teachers, cutting budgets, and so my on-ramp into board and governance was pretty intense. I served on the board for almost 6 years. I'm a proud graduate of Leadership TASB class of 2015. And our family, my significant other is just retired as a superintendent from a Houston area school district. So I now live in Montgomery and had the pleasure of driving down here today. Oh boy. Yeah, a little bit of hail, lots of wind, lots of fog, and really bad hair day. So I'm really happy to be here and share with you guys. Well, I'm happy I got here, first of all, and I'm really sorry there was some tornadoes in this area, so hope everyone's okay. But I'm really happy to share with you that since 2011, when I started the company, we've worked in over 80 communities across Texas and other states. We do public relations, and I'll talk about that, and marketing for school districts, but the backbone of our business has always been elections. The green flags on the map represent districts with up to 5,000 students, the orange flags up to 30,000 students, blue flags over 30,000 students. So we are a small boutique marketing firm. And we normally get bonds and propositions, TREs, that are what you would call high risk. They're either fall in three categories. They're either people who want to win, people who failed, or people who districts who feel like they are a high risk. $1 billion bonds, where there's $100 million a year escalation, or they might have other extenuating circumstances like a stadium proposition where they feel like they really need that extra help. Over these 80 communities that we've worked in, we've had 97 propositions and we have a 93% rate. Since 2020, we have only dropped 3 propositions with the new ballot language, so we don't let multiple prop bonds go down. And last year in 2020, I'm really proud to say that we worked in Northside ISD, which is the 4th largest district in the state, with Dr. Woods, $960 million. We also worked way out here, Blackwell ISD. Doug, how many students? 175? Yeah. 783 voters, $14 million. In the same year, we do the same scope of services. We do the same work for every client. And so hopefully as I walk you through how we approach the work, you'll get to see what makes us a little bit different. So we do have 4 categories of services that you would find in a marketing firm: strategic communications, branding, campaign management, and data intelligence is the backbone really of all of these strategies for us. For our election services, we have some pre-election services, which we're working with you now. Obviously, board training and workshops. We work with community advisory committees, of course, but these are all the things that we typically do in our scope of work when we're working with the school district. Our secret sauce, what makes us different, I think, and stand out is our team. Everybody on my team is an expert in their field, and they have 1 degree of separation usually from public ed. So I said my significant other is retired superintendent. My daughter is actually a chief of staff or state rep, and she's a pro pub ed and worked for the Texas School Alliance. Actually, my significant other is now the executive director of the Texas School Alliance. So all the people on my staff also have those same experiences and connections. We also do all of our staff development nationally and in DC. We're really working with and listening to the partisan messaging and their strategies. So not just what's going on with public ed and what's going on in your community, but what's the RNC, what's the DNC doing? Obviously, we know, and you heard Mr. Witt talk about changes in elections and the passing rate, and some of that is attributed to a messaging machine on the right geared toward bringing more independent voters back toward the Republican Party. And those messages are showing to work, so we're going to see more of those. And that's just part of the work that we do. And so we look at that when we do an analysis of your voters, and we determine, what we can expect to see from the partisan world during your election cycle. The other thing, number 5, this intense focus on data, I'll cover in detail in a moment, but it should really be, like I said earlier, number 1. So campaign management and election services. Unless you're Rumpelstiltskin, you've been asleep, this is no shocker to anyone. Elections are changing and evolving rapidly, highly charged political environment. All of our general elections since 2016 really have reflected this nationally and statewide, and that's not going to change anytime soon. As a matter of fact, I know the governor's inauguration was last week, and his three things, the second one was parental rights. So this messaging is working. It will continue, caged around school finance, vouchers, accountability, and all those other things. So past behavior is the best predictor of future behavior. If you've been married, or have kids, once again, this is not a surprise, but this is what we use for voters to tell us what they're going to do in any election cycle. So the first thing that we love to have is polling data, which you all have invested in with probably the highest reputable firm in the state, and your opinion survey is about to go out in the field in the next few days. And so we will have those results back. We're pushing to have them back before you call the election so that you can gauge some information from that if you need it. But other than that, it's going to give us not just not support for the overall bond propositions and the projects. It's going to give us some dimension on believability of that ballot language. And I'll talk about this a little bit later, but that's really the biggest thing that we need to know, especially in a no tax bond. When we first started working with the district, the first thing I asked Dr. Jackson is, can you just do 50 cents a month? Can we just say it's a tax increase because the ballot language? He said, it's not possible. It's just not possible. So as Mr. Witt said earlier, you guys are the bird nest on the ground in terms of financial picture. You are an anomaly in this business. And because of that, you have these amazing benefits. But that tax language, that ballot language, coupled with the 65 and older tax freeze and a no tax election, presents us with a really interesting messaging challenge going into the election. So the concept of we'll just do a no tax election and we'll win is actually not working out that way in the real election cycle. And I'll refer to that in a little bit. So the first thing we do is we start collecting data. So right now we're in the process of collecting survey data. We're also in the process of collecting all types of voter analysis. So we're collecting data from the county, from the district. We buy some data, and I call it a data cocktail. We basically pour a bunch of things in, stir them around, clean it up, and we start to create segments of voters. So this is a sample of what a voting analysis report would look like, breaking down your what we call a master file or a master database of your school district, and really looking at total voters, target voters, mail ballot voters, voters by age, staff voters, parent voters, partisanship, early voting history, gender, which is not that important in a school bond. But these numbers represent real people with real demographic data. And so this is how we start to build our targets and our plans. And then we also, if you guys remember when you ran for school board, there was probably someone locally who gave you a target list and said, this is who's voting in your election, and that's who you mailed to and work with. We have that same ability, but we actually add other people into the target besides people who regularly vote in this cycle. And the first thing that I'll be doing is a turnout model. So the turnout model is really important because one of the reasons why these bonds are failing is because either the districts or the strategists that are working with them don't really understand the cycle that they're in. And there's 2 cycles a year for school bonds. They're May and November, but odd year elections are very different than even year elections because of mail ballots. So mail ballots are actually mailed out as early as March 7th, so we could have 65 and olders and disabled people go into their mailbox, pulling out a mail ballot and voting on your issue as early as the week before spring break up until the week right after. So it's really important that we get messaging to them very early. The other thing we're going to be looking at is age very closely, and this is just an example. This This is a very high number of older voters, but this is actually may be kind of reflective of your community, depending upon how much growth you have and how established the community is. It may not be this high, but I can tell you that when we get to the May election, we'll probably see a minimum of 70%, if not 80% of the voters are over the age of 50. And so I always hear this, I heard it earlier today, well, if all of our staff votes, we'll win. And I can tell you that 10% of your teachers will vote in this cycle if you do nothing. You have to do a lot to get 50% of teachers to vote, even in your own district. And so there's those strategies of, well, people will vote for this because there's no tax increase. Remember, 80% of the people who are voting are over the age of 50. About 40% of those are tax frozen. Just that's based on my historical statewide. I don't know that exactly, but it's going to be close. And 40% of those are tax frozen. And if they don't know their taxes are frozen because you haven't done an election in 9 years, you've had a whole group of people turn 65, or if they're confused about their tax freeze, or if they're confused about this is a property tax increase, they're voting against. And so this goes to from a communications problem to a math problem very quickly. Because in that survey, if this group of people right here is saying, and they make up 40% of the turnout, and they're saying, you know what, only half of us are going to support your bond because we really don't believe in that, then that means we've got to go to these people. These 50 to 64-year-olds, not a reliable voter for us. They're people like me. Their kids are in college, they want to buy an RV, or they're paying for weddings, or they want to retire. And so school taxes are not top of mind unless they have grandkids in your system. And even then, they might give it a second thought. But these 18 to 49-year-olds, they are your most engaged group of voters. And so once again, we're looking at numbers here. How many live here? How many can we get to vote? What are our polling times and locations look like? So these are all things that while we're doing this voting analysis, we're working with Dr. Jackson and Dustin to make sure that we have all of the pieces in place that we know who we need to turn out and make sure that they can actually vote, because most people in this age group are at work between 8 and 5. So if we have 8 to 5 polling, it's very unlikely that no matter what kind of communications we do, they physically cannot get to the polls and vote. So that's one of the first things that we look at. So to that end, we're looking at that right now in your district and just looking at what the county has currently provided. I'm not interested in election day. We already know who the election day voters are and how they're going to lean based on things like their gender, their age, their locations. That the poll that you've paid for is going to tell us that. But what we're looking for here is how can we maximize turnout of what I call regular people. Regular people, just the regular people who want to participate in this election. How do we make it easier for them to vote? So this is some of the things that we're looking at now. Once voting starts, we start providing reports to the district every day. And really, if you have an advocacy group, a PAC, their primary role is identifying voters as yes, no, undecided. They always think it's putting out signs and passing out flyers, and all that stuff is great. But it's really doing the work of identifying supporters and tracking those on a daily basis. So we look at all these things. We also track by precinct, because some of these precincts are going to light up as we make these connections and do this analysis. And so it's going to make it easier for your PAC, once again, tied to the polling data, to identify those pockets of voters. And then also we have some reports that tell us how different segments of voters, particularly in your school district, are voting. So once again, one of my losses that we did have, it's been a while back in a very, very small school district, we lost by 1 vote. So you know how people joke about 50% plus 1? Well, I was at 50% minus 1 in one of my elections, and we had a board member and their spouse who didn't vote. It was the walk of shame, so to speak. So we actually make sure that all of you guys at some point get to the polls, because it was on the front page of the paper, and we don't ever let that happen again. But my point in saying that is we're very granular in our analysis and our tracking going into the election and then coming out of it. And one of my biggest goals with all of our clients is making sure that you have levers and you're in control of your election all the way to the end, so that you're not getting to election day and then you're just biting your nails for 2 weeks. We want to make sure that you have data every day so that you can maximize that turnout and really work with your voters. So on the creative side, this is what typically people would think that we do. And content creation is everything for us. We follow a lot of districts and we're working in some now that lost last year. And they're like, well, we did everything that we saw at Teesborough. You know, we got all this stuff from our friends and we did what they did, and why didn't we win? And they're putting out information, right? They're posting it, but it's not, sometimes it's not relevant. The stories aren't relevant, the content's not relevant, and and sometimes it's not consumable. So these are the kind of the benchmark of when we're pushing out creative, it's got to be meaningful to the voters that are reading it. And we're targeting two different kinds of voters in this cycle in May. We're targeting the voter who votes and the voter who does not vote but has some affiliation with the district, and we can get them to vote. So that is a completely different kind of voter. The grandparent versus the young parent. Very different ways that they're consuming information, and we want to make sure that we're in every channel. So we have a very dynamic planning process. Once we develop the communications plan, we push it out through digital, print, all of your ISD channels, which school districts are great because they have lots of free channels. Like the backpack is a channel. You could stuff it full of stuff, send it home, and as long as the kid takes it out or mom and dad take it out. But there's lots of channels, school messenger, marquees, all of those things. And then, of course, using any other earned media or local channels that you might have. So what makes us different? So first thing we're doing is developing brands. And I'm sorry, I'm gonna step back here real quick. The architect that you guys are using with Huckabee, they have a long track record of developing brands, and I see some of their work that they've done here for you already. Lots of great stuff to start with, but you'll see that all of our brands are different, and really looking at how we use color to tell the stories. So I know y'all are familiar with A-Leaf, not sure about Tyler, but looking at district colors and adding colors to that, making sure that what voters see is very clear, the story is clear, that it's not just about bricks and mortar. And so I'll pass out some examples, but how do we use color to start to tell stories? So I'm going to pass out some examples of ways that we tell these stories. And you'll see that a lot of times we don't start with, here's the stadium, here's the, here's the project that we're doing. We start out with what's going on in the district. And I'm going to hold on to this one real quick, so I'm going to hold it up. So I'll pass these out. And I'll say some things about them. Dr. Jackson, you don't get one because you've already seen them all. Okay. Yeah. So if you're looking at some of these, stories start out with what the survey tells us. So we don't have to always jump into buildings. We start talking about community groups, equity, comparable facilities, how long it's been since we've had a bond, always focusing on tax freeze, always, always, always making sure that our voters are understanding that. Really using lots of color and infographics. This is East Central ISD. They failed a bond November of 2021. Needed to go back out $70 million a year of escalation, and they were they were starting to be fast growth. And so we came back, looked at their materials, and really they just had a deficit in their messaging in terms of voters want to see what you're doing with the money. They want to clearly open up something. They want to see pictures. They want to see these easily digestible infographics. They don't want to read pages and pages of narrative. We have to include some text for explanation. I'm sorry, I'm making that blow, and probably y'all are going, But when we developed, so for them, their colors were this gold and black, like not that electrifying, right? But we added all these Fiesta, vintage Spurs type colors that their community really gravitated toward. and created a story that they could then start to talk about beyond the election. Here's some financial facts. Here's things about our last bond, and it's all neatly encapsulated so it can be pulled apart into social media or videos, but then also can be used as a story. I kept this one. This is from Texarkana. This was a historic election that I call it historic. This is an election that will be a game changer for its community. This is a community that has never done a bond in over 50 years that anyone can remember that had a tax increase, and the highest they'd ever passed was 29 million. And we came in, their board was at a place where they had older facilities in their more socioeconomic, lower demographic areas that had not been touched since they were built. They also had a high school that had the same CTE facility since it was built in 1968 and $59 million worth of career and technology. So going into that, the story here was really important, and being able to show very clearly, once again, to voters who had not passed a bond like this, who were mostly Anglo, asking them to vote for schools that their kids would never attend. And this bond, it was $180 million, actually passed, and Doug's actually going there tomorrow. I think they're voting to start selling their bonds. And this will be one that changes. It is a game changer for their kids and for their community. And so once again, lots of clarity, lots of photos, bringing in color. And so here in LaPorte, we've talked about, not exactly, but adding these types of colors to your color palette so that, once again, we can use those for more color, more storytelling. So these are just examples of brands and the way that we build those brands, branching out and keeping this information really simple. Once again, so voters can quickly digest things and vote for these bonds. Last, we use a lot of video and storytelling. We'll bring our team down here, and we will do a lot of work with your actual principals, teachers, students, and let them tell the stories of your bonds. And so you'll see probably a minimum of 6 to 8, if not more, bonds. We may even ask you guys as board members to talk about that and talk about, you know, your stewardship or fiscal responsibility. Because one thing about being a board member is, and if you don't remember anything else that I say tonight, and you may not, that bonds are not about taxes. They're not about bricks and mortar. Bonds are about teaching and learning. Bonds are about either removing barriers for teaching and learning or creating pathways and opportunities. And when we start changing that paradigm and really start to talk about bonds in terms of what does this mean to the people that are in these spaces every day? What does it mean to learning outcomes? What does it mean when the roof leaks in the elementary school and we have trash cans all over the gym and the kids can't have PE? What does that mean to them? Or when you have to have 5 lunches and kids aren't eating till 1 o'clock. So in your district, you've got some other opportunities. You've got this stadium project that is ready to be replaced past its useful life. So who tells that story for you? And it's going to be several people, because it's going to take, it's a big project, it's a big investment. But this stadium is the heartbeat. It's the heartbeat of your community. It's the dog pound, right? I saw it. This is where everything happens, or a lot of things happen. The energy of your community is created. And so we use that and build on that as we start to tell these stories to your community and make these projects come to life and become relevant and consumable. So last, this is just an example of how we do social media. And then Doug talked about this earlier, but there were a lot of law changes in 2019. So it just says, you know, here was kind of what we had before 2019, and this is all the other things. We lost branch voting, which was a killer. We got this ballot language, which is a huge killer. We got multiple ballot propositions, which is kind of a killer if you don't know how to pass them. And so, so these are some of the things that we're working with, and obviously, like he shared earlier, that some of these projects have to be in multiple propositions. I have some thoughts. I'm waiting to get some of the survey data back about the structuring of your stadium project. I know obviously it has to be in its own proposition, but I've talked to your bond counsel, and we're once again polling the community to see what their understanding is. But there may be, because it's a zero tax bond, doesn't really matter where a project lives. And as Doug said, it will probably most likely be a tax decrease by the time this is over with. When do the next assessment rounds come out? Will they get those February, March? Could it?
Value will get preliminary value in April and certified value in July.
And so your 14 billion, is that reflective of what we think it's going to be or what it was last year? So if it goes up, this could actually be a decrease. Okay, well, we'll see. We'll see then. We'll wait on bated breath.
The INS side will use any outperformance of the assessed value for early principal retirement.
Okay.
Paying the 28 cents. The tax reduction is very likely is on the M&O side with continued tax rate compression mandatory for all schools.
Okay, so it would still be a no tax, not a decrease. Okay. So these are some things that we'll be exploring with that polling data to determine with voters, you know, how they like to hear about this educational conference facility field house, project, and whether it should sit in Prop A or with the stadium. So these are some things that we'll be considering. And then last, for board members, always talking about ethics. I know you probably had Tom Sage here talking to you about this already, but there are do's and don'ts for employees of the district. Board members, the only time that you are considered a board member is when you're sitting on the dais in a meeting. The rest of the time, you are just an average citizen. And so you can participate in PACs, you can give them money, you can put signs on your yard, you can take an advocacy position. You just cannot use any district resources, like your district email, not on district property for sure. So that's something that if you have questions about, obviously it is to your comfort level how you want to participate, but more and more, we have board members serving and leading PACs all over the state and getting involved in this process because it's kind of like rocking your own baby. It is a huge initiative, something that it looks like you've done one in 18 years. And so if you're going to do these every 5 to 8 to 9 years, then it is a huge district initiative, and you all are welcome to get involved in that however you feel comfortable. So I'm happy to take any questions or thoughts.
Board, do you have any questions?
So we had Trustee Hanks gave us just like a sheet, which is interesting because he talks about how we are we pay the 7th most in the state of Texas on recapture.
Yeah.
And so that's a very unique thing. We're not a huge district. We
Yeah.
pay more than a lot of other people. So my question, I know you said you work with 80 or 90 different communities. Have you ever worked with community that has been recaptured?
Eanes. They might be, where do they fit on there? Westland,
Number
Eanes, 3 or 4, Highland Park. We've worked in Plano. I'm looking at your list. Like Travis, we've worked in Midland. We've worked in Odessa. We've worked in even smaller districts where it's even more crippling. And I'm looking to see if one of the ones that I passed out to you, but there's some key messages around recapture, and on the INS side, it's 100% stays in the district. We actually make that into an infographic. One of the other big ones, let me see, this is Blackwell, this is the little $14 million, and you'll see, like, we do the same work for $960 million would do for $14 million, but you'll see on here, they are wind and solar, oil. They're out in West Texas, 90% paid for by energy on the front and the back, and then has some of that explanation on the inside. So you all will also have some of that same messaging, reminding people, and I'll have to get that info from you, what that number is, but reminding them that the residential homeowner is not going to bear even the zero that your local business partners and your 313 agreements and all those, they're paying the bulk of that for them. So they can, it's important that you remind them of this, even if it doesn't always apply to this bond, it could apply to the next one. So just talking about the tax freeze, you might think that it's redundant because it's a zero tax. So why do we need to talk about the freeze? Because they need the assurance to know that if it passes, it still doesn't affect them because they will make up 40, 35, maybe even 50% of the turnout in the cycle. So we have to cover that and cover it. So Any other thoughts? I didn't mention that, but we'll also be working with the district to do several mailers, and I didn't pass these around, but these 65 and older, one of these, we'll be doing a couple of these, and I'll hope your pack will too, but we've got some videos that go out with these so that people can learn more about the tax freeze and learn that it is a real thing and how to get it, so. Other questions? Thoughts?
I guess, so, I guess on the tangible side, like, we had, I know you guys pull a lot of different data sets, which I'm a huge believer in numbers, but Doug put the example from 2014 about our percentage wise. We passed the bond, but it wasn't with a huge percentage.
Right.
And I mentioned that because I was the village idiot that they got to sign up to be the PAC chair then. And I was
I always thought it said right here,
no, like,
sucker on my
literally,
forehead.
I think that's how they got me. But it's, no, but it is, no, not. They, I was very naive in the fact that I thought it was a no-brainer. I thought this thing, when you look at other districts, they would apply at a much higher rate. So,
Never a no-brainer.
I know LaPorte's not unique and not alone on this, but we have a very different, some intangibles, right, that you're not gonna get from just pulling from voter registration rolls and things like that. So,
Right.
it's in terms of why people maybe mistrust the district based on past bonds and things like
Right.
that. So, does your team have the ability to go in and ask some of those kind of more
Yeah,
pointed
so-
questions on?
And I'm gonna ask you to talk to the board too, because they have the history of that.
Yeah, so there's several ways that we glean that information. Well, there's three, really. One is through the polling, because the polling has some questions at the front. How do you perceive the district, overall, just the brand, good brand, bad brand, quality of education, condition of facilities, how do they spend their money? And a lot of times districts will go, we don't want to ask those questions, because we don't want the answer. But the truth is, they correlate those questions to support. So if people say the condition is great because your buildings are clean, they look great from the outside, you do a great job maintaining them, but they don't realize they're too small, they don't have enough plugs, your stadium doesn't have enough bathrooms, right? It has structural issues, whatever. We can correlate those to get some of those perceptions, and then they're broken down by almost all of those categories that I showed you. So by age, by partisanship. I mean, there's things that I can already tell you that are going to come back in your survey. And there was one that we did, well, it was in East Central. They did the polling, and I'm sure Bonnie's had the same experience. They've done the polling in June, and this one, the election came in as exactly what they predicted, because their sampling matches the registered voter file of the district exactly, and then they match it to the election cycle. So what you would have seen in November is not the voter that you're going to, well, the voter in May absolutely voted in November, but there's a lot of people that voted in November that you won't see again until the presidential cycle. And that's just the nature of knowing turnout. So the second way that we do that is we take all that data that we collect locally, and we literally sit down with that map, that geography, that map. And so I'll have a map, you guys will have a map here, your advocacy group will have a map, and we literally sit down and we start looking at, demographics of these areas. There might be pockets of wounded feelings or leadership where there might be people that are change leaders in those areas that may have issues that we have to work with. So it's really just kind of breaking it down. And the third thing is just the anecdotal, starting to have these kinds of conversations to say where the body's buried, looking under rocks, and that's just part of this process that we'll be doing in the next 2 to 3 weeks. The voting analysis will only take us so far, but it's the local, that last one, number 3, that really tells us, here's what we did before, here's what people have done since. And the polling is going to tell us what the favor is, but the great thing about this instrument that you've paid for, it's going to tell us how much movement there is in the community. That tells us it's usually a good thing, that people will move. But the worst scenario is if we ask them how they would vote, we give them all this information, and then they come back and say, yeah, that's all great, but I'm sticking to my position, I'm not movable. Then once again, it goes from communications problem to a math problem real quick. Because now you're, well, out of this age group, we've lost this many, this age group. I mean, it will tell you that with precision. And so now it moves your advocacy group from primarily voter education and voter identification to massive hunting and pecking. certain kinds of voters. Yep. And that's how we continue to win propositions. We don't typically drop propositions. I don't like to lose. And, I don't boo-boo on my hand from this weekend. We take it very seriously, and now more than ever, the cost of escalation of losing a $230 million bond is significant. It's 14 or 15 million a year, I think. So it's worth all of us fighting for. No, it would be more than that. It'd be about 20 million a year. So we have 230 million reasons, or 240 million reasons to really bear down and work on this hard and get it done the first time. So get it done. So anything else I can answer? Oh. Okay. Are you introducing her?
Wait, I have some questions. I have some questions for you, actually.
Okay, sure. Oops, sorry. I'll get that in a minute. Oh, thank you.
With the survey data,
Yeah.
do you break it down based on likely voters? Because being that we have a bond in May, you know, there are people that vote in November that does not necessarily vote in May.
Mm-hmm.
Traditionally, our community, we probably since 2008, probably, I go even going further than that, is usually about 1,000 to 1,200
Yep.
voters in an election.
Yeah.
And so when you talk about survey data, and I don't know if it's just going to be in Moss or whatever, as being able to break down, looking at voting history as far as, okay, who's turning back the packets, you know, the information, and how likely are they to vote in a particular election? Did that necessarily break that down?
Yeah, so at a very granular level. So the first thing is your survey is half phone, half online, which is great because one, what they're doing is they're taking respondents to fill certain demographic buckets, let's say. So, you know, so many older females over this age, so many males over this age, so many young people that are Democrats, so many young people that are Republicans, and they're, once again, building that sample to exactly match the registered voter file of the political subdivision of LaPorte Independent School District. Then they skew that to match this election cycle. So just like you said, the midterm election had anomalies in it that, and Doug showed you how there were hardly 39 elections in 2020 and there was 198. Well, you know, all of those moved up 2 years and piled up on the ballots, and people thought, oh, well, we're just going to rinse and repeat and do what we did pre-2019, and that it's not working anymore for a lot of people, as you can see. That survey will skew the turnout to this cycle. And what we know about this May and this November is 95% of people will stay home. 5% of people, 4 to 6% will vote in May and November unless there's a contested local race, a bond referendum, or next November there could be a gambling referendum. So those high turnout cycles are actually great cycles to go out in if you know which cycle you're in, because May is very different from November next year, and you've got a primary where people are requesting mail ballots, so people are voting at different cadences. So this survey is going to match the respondents to this particular cycle in May, and that's why it's so accurate. That's why it's so accurate.
Couple of things that just, I guess, let you be aware of some challenges. One is we got some new neighborhoods and some new apartments, and some of them coming in and they're getting their tax bill in,
Right.
and it says Goose Creek ISD because they collect on property taxes on our behalf. They're thinking they're sending their taxes to Goose Creek and not to LaPorte ISD. Okay. So there's some education
It needs to be done.
on that. Also, too, we have 2 cities on the east side, Morgan's Point and Shore Acres, which has a high voter participation rate, but also and of course their children go to LaPorte ISD schools, but they don't have any schools necessarily within their boundary,
community,
and so
right.
they're, you know, with that. The other thing too is our voter participation is very high on the east side compared to the west side
Okay.
of the district. This is based off of historical and also anecdotal data. We probably have about 1,000 students that maybe reside in the district, but necessarily go to other school districts outside of the Porte ISD. I'm sorry. And so, you know, as far as what does this bond and what, you know, trying to, you know, convince, like, how does this benefit me?
Right.
Okay. The other thing, I know you touched on the tax rate, but also too, and I think Jeff mentioned about the recapture, is the amount of debt. That's going to be an issue as well. And I think, and also kind of explaining how much the school finance system penalizes us if we use maintenance and operation funds compared to on the debt side.
Right.
And so and so that's going to involve some education as well. I'm not sure, I haven't seen how you do it in the other communities or wherever. I know a lot of the kind of oxygen in the room is probably going to be the stadium, but there's going to be other propositions, and being able to kind of distinguish and be able to educate the voters on each of the other propositions as well, because I know a lot of it is going to be, that stadium is going to take a lot of oxygen in the room, and as far as the political discourse.
Yeah.
And so I just kind of lay that out for you, you
Well,
know.
and on that stadium, once again, I'm hoping that we get some of the polling data back before that to see, before you call the election, to see if there's resistance. And we have to work with your bond counsel, because he's convicted about the way these projects sit on propositions that's a little bit different than other legal counsel. That being said, their voters are not dumb. I mean,
No.
that's why these bonds are found. They're not dumb. So there's usually 3 or 4 or 5 reasons why proposals fail. And I can, within 20 minutes, I don't have to look at the voting history. I can pretty ask a few questions and figure out pretty quick what happened. But the biggest question I have is whether that, like I said, the educational facility field house should live in Prop A, or whether it should just be coupled with the stadium as one site, one concept, one project. And the reason is this: we're not going to hide that from anybody.
Right.
You're going to see that project. It's clearly visible project. It's not one that's going to be hidden anywhere in an image or in the cost. And so it may make more sense if we can do it legally to structure this as one thing. The dollar amount's going to be high, but it's still zero tax impact. And in the research that we've done, it's really, what is it going to cost me? And if the cost me is, it's zero if it sits over here, or zero if it sits over here. If it sits in Prop A, people don't believe their taxes. I'm just saying, if they don't believe their taxes are frozen, which a plurality of voters don't across the state believe their taxes are frozen, and understand that the ballot language doesn't apply to them. So 2/3 of voters across the state are telling us, I don't believe one of those two things or both. That's bad, right? That's bad, because they make up a high percentage turnout. If we put that in Prop A and they see that as us trying to hide that project or sell it as a conference center when it's adjacent to the field and it has athletic facilities, then it could backfire on Prop A as a whole. The other thing, safety and security in Prop A. So Representative King has a bill right now that they're putting forth to, that has a fiscal note to fund some additional, I guess, safety and security, more significant than was announced by the governor in October. And they'll probably vote on that sooner than later. So that will raise another objection in people's minds. Well, you guys already got money for safety and security. So these are things that we're testing in your poll. What we don't want to do is make it seem like you are trying to sell an apple when it was an orange. If an orange should go with an orange, then that's what we need to package it as. So I know that there's lots of, you know, it won't look so bad over here. It will just look like you're trying to sell me one thing, but it's something else. So maybe it should just live with, you know, the stadium. I don't know the answer to that yet, but I will. And I don't know legally, because Tom's looking into that. If we can package it all together legally, I think we can. So That's going to be the only thing, but because it's a zero tax impact, it doesn't matter. The only thing is the sticker goes up, but it is what it is. It is all one story, and it is all one project, kind of, one site, so.
And I think that transparency is very important. You kind of hit on the nail because in the past, and I don't remember which bond it was or something, there's been anecdotal where, a bond had gone out to the community. It was advertised that there was going to be a 9th grade center for the high school, and it ended up being the administration building or something like that. So there's some kind of, yes, in the past, apparently. I don't know if it's true or not. This was before my time, but, it's true. Okay. Okay. So, yeah.
I've served on a board, obviously you guys serve on a board. Ambiguity is not our friend. Being very clear, brevity is our friend, specificity is our friend, transparency is our friend. There is no hiding anything anymore. And so it's really just us learning. If we talk about an educational facility to replace literally this space that we're in, does the community understand how many more teachers and students you have since this space was built, that it is no longer adequate? And if we can hop over that, if in that survey people say, yeah, I go to stuff in there all the time and we're elbow to elbow, now we start to have a conversation about what that conference educational space is for. So I'm not worried about it in either prop. I just want to make sure that there is no ambiguity or people feel like you're trying to trick me by calling this one thing, but it's actually locker rooms with a big room on the top, and I'm not falling for that. And we don't want that. It's not worth...
On the record, we're not trying to trick anyone.
No, absolutely not. Absolutely not. So that's what we just need to know is what do they understand. So we'll have some of that data for you as soon as possible.
Well, thank you.
Sure.
Thank you, ma'am. Okay. Thank you, Ms. Johnson, obviously Mr. Witt, some incredible information, and I think we've done a great job of talking about our financial state, and then obviously some of the challenges that we'll face from a marketing stance and all those components. So next we'll start to dig into what we actually look like. I think in the last board meeting, I came up and kind of gave you an overview of the percentages of what the propositions look like, but tonight we'll be able to put some numbers on it. I want to note a few things. We work heavily with our bond counsel, Tom Sage. He couldn't be here tonight, but we work heavily. We have a meeting with him tomorrow to vet everything that we do. And you're going to see the Educational Center tonight in Proposition A. So I put some asterisks on there, obviously working with Ms. Johnson and our other teams to see where that comes out once we get some of the survey results that could move into Proposition C. We also have one more steering committee meeting Thursday that we're really going to finalize this, obviously, before it gets in front of you. So it's at 99.6%, right? Pickleball numbers right there, right? I like pickleball. It's up and coming, Jeff, right? Okay, so again, before we start too, I want to recognize a few people that are with us. Tim Barnes is with Huckabee, our architect team. We got Bonnie Slattery here. We've got Jeff Hurd over there with Gallagher Construction, our construction management team. Those guys spend a tremendous amount of time with us, and we hang out every week and we meet every other day. And back when I had good hair, we were, all the good stuff. Okay, so let's look at our three propositions and where we stand currently and what we are proposing to put in front of you on February 7th. So obviously, through legislation, we talked a little bit about, Doug talked and Rana talked a little bit about how we have to now put these in different propositions. In 2014, when you went out and you voted for that bond in 2014, you went and checked yes and no, and all that was together. We no longer have the ability to do that, so really that campaign and that marketing component becomes increasingly important. So when you look at us from an A, B, and a C component, this is the numbers that were tied to it. So currently in our Proposition A, and I'm gonna walk you through each one of these, but this is really our district side. We've got some projects in there, but it's really that maintenance and operation, those campus-based needs. We're at $164 million. And all this is built out outside of the stadium, right? It's gonna be way past 10 years, but all this is going to be built out for 10 years or to try to uphold for 10 years. Proposition B is the technology package. And what you'll see here is that's going to be outside of the wall, so non-integrated. So you're really, what it comes down to is one-to-one. It's device, it's portable components. And then Proposition C currently is our stadium and press. Again, the educational facility is wrapped up into A as we sit here. When you break apart our props by percentage, 70% or so here is in Prop A, and then 6% in B, and then 24% is in Prop C. So proposing here at this number at 235, I think Doug was extremely clear on we have capacity to be able to do that and to be able to faithfully say that this will not impact taxes. So breaking apart Proposition A and how we've built it out, integrated technology can live in A, and what that is, now that's your network component, that's construction-based in the wall type technology, cabling, software, routers, and different components like that. Our district M&O budget, remember, 67% of our maintenance and operation budget as a district is in bond. So that's going to continue to carry out that everyday component, boilers, chillers, HVACs, concrete, roofing, and all those preventative maintenance type approaches that we do will be wrapped up in A. Safety and security will be a part of that. Fine arts also, Matt, I think 30% of your budget is wrapped up in bond, and there will be some equipment component in that as well. And then the educational center, and I'll talk a little bit more at length when we get to the pictures on the educational center. Fine arts renovations, there are some targets for the high school as far as cabling and sound systems and curtains, and we've got a lot of old equipment. We're going to upgrade all that. Lomax is another site that we're looking at, but throughout the district you'll see some renovations. Transportation, another unique piece for us as a district, and not a lot of districts are like this. Our entire replacement cycle with our buses as well as our white fleet, so the vans and the trucks that our maintenance and operation guys are using, and technology is wrapped up into our bond. District projects and campus projects, and again, I'll talk a little bit out there. We've got some drainage, and really that has to do with supporting the stadium, G Street, and what we're going to do. But over 10 years, mapping that out puts Proposition A at $164 million. So as far as integrated technology and how we break this apart, and I'll kind of buzz through this, but there's $23 million allotted for that area, and we're talking about software and support, and you can see it annually, and again, we push it out over 10 years, and that's kind of how we get those numbers. There are some projects that we've built in. One is where we're sitting right now, upgrading the sound systems and the projector system in here to enhance that. DeWalt Academy is another area that we're looking at. It needs entirely new cabling and networking throughout that building. That's big chunks of money, so that'll be a project that's going to be allocated to that. And then District Fiber as a whole, trying to not only upgrade that, but have a secondary source. So if one goes down, we have the ability to continue to run and having those options. So you can see those are a one-time fee that's a part of that. That's not pushed out over 10 years. Hardware, again, now you're looking at your Wi-Fi routers and your different structural components in your facilities. We've got that outlined. And then for this slide, I didn't put it on the others. I don't know why I left it here, but we've got inflation built in all of this. We've worked alongside our different groups that oversee what we're doing, and obviously Doug as well. And we've built out inflation to carry us into those 10-year marks. Questions on integrated technology? Okay. So I mentioned 67% of our M&O budget, and we were smart in that, right? Again, every 10 years when we went to a bond, the district moved funds out of that general fund and put it into that bond to free up the ability to put more teachers in classrooms and more programs in place. And in that general fund, 84% of that is staffing, right? So that's a big chunk of it. There's not a whole lot left, but most of that is supplies and program support. So this is huge for us. With our operating costs and replacements of different life cycles and things that we deal with. Obviously our life safety, which that's fire and alarm systems, and overall general campus improvements are built in over that time frame. Stop at any point. Safety, so we're built in $500,000 annually at 10 years. So that puts us at $5 million over that time frame. This state, and Ms. Johnson mentioned, obviously are pushing out a lot of funding via grants, but they don't tell the whole truth. They say, we're giving you this money for silent panic alarms, and it's $20,000, right? Eddie, we can barely buy a phone with that. That's a joke. But nonetheless, there are a lot of that going on. But again, this is going to continue to allow us to stay up and be able to have the top tier technology. We already have a lot of greatness in that area, but to continue that. I mean, right now, we've got to work at looking at perimeter fencing. As of August 23, we've got to outline funds. Any excess or access door that's not surrounded in perimeter, does not have film on it, you've got to put fence around it. So that's a big uptake, and we've got to make sure we've got the funds to do that. So this bond will help support us and continue to, again, keep us at the top tier when it comes to safety. Fine arts, there's two pieces. I mentioned the budget in general, and that's not all of his budget. A lot of that's wrapped up in equipment and different things that we do, and those things are highly expensive. But then there's those renovations that we've outlined, talked a little bit about the high school, talked a little bit about Lomax Junior. There's some other areas and music classes throughout the elementary areas, but you can kind of see how that is. A question came up on band uniforms and why is band, identified, why not football? Well, band being that you can buy them and they last for a long period of time, they can actually fall under FF&E. Is that correct, Matt? So that's a big deal for us because those cost a lot of money, and I think ours are coming to the end of their life cycle, right?
They usually last, what, 10 years, Matt?
Year 8. Here we go. So educational center, and here was what Ms. Johnson was speaking of. Currently, we have it setting in our A package. Being so, when we spoke with our bond counsel, its heavy usage is for professional development and staff training. And there's some flexible educational space. So it's not, generally speaking, all for athletics. Yes, the lower level has locker rooms and there's a weight room, but there's a huge 450 capacity professional development center on top. And again, I'll show you a picture as we get closer to the stadium piece that will allow us to train our people. It'll allow us to open our doors to outside entities like the city and so forth. It's going to have the top tier technology. It can be one large space where you can speak to 400 individuals, and then it breaks off into 5 different partitioned areas, and you can have 5 different spaces if you need to. It's beautiful. We're proud of it. When you're inside of it, the entire back wall is glass, and you look out into the stadium. You can walk outside on a veranda, and you obviously can see the complex there. But again, right now, we have that in A, so the number you saw at 164 has that $35 million in it. If we do move that, that's obviously going to change what A looks like. But when we come in front of you, obviously on February 7th, we'll have this nailed down and as clean as possible. Transportation, $540,000 annually over 10 years, so 5.4. We purchase anywhere roughly 8 buses every 2 years. Those are a mixture of our gen ed buses as well as special education buses. But that's kind of our cycle right now. And we kind of layer in our maintenance facilities. So for our maintenance fleet, but we're looking at putting a new bus wash in and also enhancing our GPS system that's on our bus. Yeah, gets the problems. Yeah, yeah, that's correct. So we're going to get a new one, right? So hopefully it works. Yeah, hope so. Okay, so the important piece here, and Dr. Jackson and myself before Christmas, I guess, did a tour of all the campuses, and we kind of spent some time with the teachers and the administration to ensure that they kind of knew what we were going on. They had a general understanding. We're going to do that again. If we're blessed with you guys calling this on the 7th, we're going to go back out and put now with some numbers and kind of show them where we are. But it's important to note, we want to clearly identify that all district campuses will be included in this, in package A. They will be getting a plethora of different things, but I kind of broke it apart here. And I'll show you an example of kind of what we showed the campuses. But you could be getting all of these, or you can get portions that's just depending on the need. And we worked with campus principals and different teams to identify needs. We looked at, the work that we have to do as a maintenance department. Are we spending a lot of time changing bulbs out here? Is there foundational issues? And obviously we added in components there too. But generally speaking, these are the 6 areas that you'll kind of see some of the different components, obviously with safety and security and facility enhancements and so on and so forth. But what we presented to the campus looks more like this. So when we went to Rizzuto, We met with their team, and this is ever evolving. We've worked with Mr. Lozano here, obviously, and his team, and then down to the teachers on items that they specifically need, and to ensure that, again, all the campuses get touched and that we're keeping our facilities up to par and making sure that we've got the things that we need. Any questions on that? Okay. The last component in Prop A that we're still planning out, and Thursday's crucial for our steering committee, is our final bigger projects, I would say, or enhancements in our district that we're looking at. There's some allocated money to these projects. One is at Lomax Junior High with the possibility of a new gym. We would take the old auxiliary gym and we would renovate that into a new fine arts space. We've got some leaking issues there and some different components that we're dealing with. So that's one project. High school, we have major issues with flooding in the front. We've got some components that we're trying to work through, but the possibility of a new front entry, a redesign there, and then the possibility of renovating the competition gym because we have tremendous amount of termite damage and there needs to be some upgrades over there. And then lastly, for Baker, looking at a Spanco outdoor cover. So what that is, you see at a lot of our campuses, those are those outdoor concrete with the cover on it. So it can act as another physical education type space. Yes, ma'am. Yep.
Not at you,
Yep.
that's the situation.
Yes, ma'am.
We have worked on this flooding situation at the high school so many times. And I would hope and pray before I get off this board or die or something,
That we keep it dry.
that we finally get this
Right.
figured out.
I mean, 3 of us swam through the school when we were there.
It seems to me that at some point we're putting good money after bad because we have redesigned that front entry 2 or 3 times.
Okay. Okay.
I didn't want you to speak, I knew of at least 2. And I would hope whoever is in charge of that this would be the final, I think I'm laughing. I would hope that this would be the final fix on that situation.
Yes, ma'am.
And I'm not frustrated at you, I'm
Sure.
frustrated at
Yeah.
the situation.
Understood.
This is from years of frustration. Okay, I'll pass it.
Yes, ma'am. Anything else on this slide here?
Can I go back to the slide before, so
Yep.
maybe before that. So I think it's $10 million to the all campuses, but if
Yeah.
I'm correct, I'm just saying like education campuses, we have 13 campuses.
Uh-huh.
And this is over a 10-year period, right? So if I'm doing the math right, that's $770,000 a year approximately, divided by 13, so each campus is gonna be about $77,000 a year over 10 years. So to me, that seems really low compared to some of these other, I mean, the next slide is $40 million
Right.
for like 4 projects. Are we confident that that $77,000 a year, again, that's assuming they're equitably spread, I know
Right.
it's not the case.
Yep. Yes, so here's,
seems like it really low.
sure. And what I will tell you is what you don't see, and it's not like it's being hidden, but what is not wrapped up is, for instance, in like safety, the safety's not gonna come out of that pocket of money, it's gonna come out of this. Maintenance and operations, a lot of what we do in the chillers and components are not going to fall in that direct campus project, it's gonna stay here. Technology, that's gonna be all in its own proposition, right? So you're exactly right. When you look at that number, generally speaking, and you break that apart, well, yeah, it's $78,000 per campus. One, not all of it will be allocated equally, and it cannot be because you've got a building in Jenny Reed that's from 1981 compared to a building at Lomax Elementary that, their list is shorter. So I hear your point, and I think what we need to do, Mr. Martin, as we continue and work with Rana and Huckabee, is be able to explain that appropriately and what that looks
I
like.
appreciate that, because I
Yes.
guess as a board member, our interest is district as a whole.
Yes.
As a parent of I may have had it Rizzuto or
Right.
Baker or whatever, I'm gonna have the most interest in what
What's
is
it
being
for
done
me?
for my school, right?
Absolutely.
So I really, to me, that'd be a tremendous
Yes.
value.
Yep.
If we could break it down, okay, Baker Junior High.
Right.
Here's how much we're gonna spend verbatim dollar-wise.
Absolutely. Yeah,
Average.
so if you look at Rizzuto, right, so safety upgrade, that's not gonna fall under them. Some of this concrete work's gonna be a part of M&O, right? So it can be broken apart, but absolutely, we can tie some of those dollar amounts to ensure the transparency part, we understand, since the beginning, and this was happening well before my time here, but when I walked in the door, that was to make sure that everything we say we're going to do, and to make sure that everybody gets the appropriate amount of renovations or so forth.
You're on that one.
Uh-huh.
Okay. The last one, 4, 5, 6, for all technology.
Yep.
Is that again, does that go back to the original technology budget, or is that specific?
So no, that'll go back to some of that's technology, some of that's going to be a part of integrated technology, right? So yeah, you can take that out of their allotted money there.
I just
Uh-huh.
want to make sure from.
Yes,
Some of that I know is specific to their,
yeah.
okay.
So pretty much every slide for per campus has these last 4, give or take. Yeah. But great questions, and that helps us be able to spin it and make sure that we're saying it appropriately, because that's a good question and it doesn't make sense, right? I understand that. So we have to make sure that we put that in front of you the proper way on the 7th. Uh-huh.
I really appreciate the wood decking around the tree.
Yeah, hey, look, they didn't care about anything on the list until we said we're going to put a wood deck around the tree roots out there. That was my first day on the job. Some girl tackled me outside and said, hey, come look at this. I'm like, yes, ma'am. Proposition B, and we actually are still, again, looking at flip-flopping. So technology may end up being C and the stadium being B. That doesn't change necessarily the amounts, but it's just how it comes off and when you're voting, how you look at it. So technology, 15 million over the 10 years. Doug spoke heavily about this and how we were going to lay out the possibility of the bonds. But this is 1-to-1. And we're about 4th, 3rd grade right now, give or take. 3 through 12, we're 1-to-1 laptops with our kiddos. We'll push that all the way down to as low as we can go until Dr. Brown tells me to stop. Yes?
I just want to make sure, okay, can you define for me again the difference between the technology in Prop B and the integrated technology in Prop A?
So, yeah. So in the wall construction, a desktop that's wired in is integrated based, right? It's not standalone where you take it and you can go home with it or you can move it over, portable. So that's really the difference. Yeah. And this was a part of the new legislation. No, it cannot. And that's frustrating, but it cannot. Anywho, we will be pushing that all the way down K-12. We'll be cart-based at the lower levels. One of the big deals in this for our teachers is we'll be pushing out 1-to-1 for our employees, and currently we do not do that right now. They're through a program, TIPS, and you guys are aware of that. We'll be looking at our new classroom standard and pushing out docking stations with monitors. So from a teacher, I'm able to take that laptop, plug it in, and it'll fire up on monitors. If I want to grade papers, then I can pick that up, walk in the middle of the room, and deliver my instruction interactively with my students as they're around me. And I've got my stylus that's connected to my wireless projector as my sound's going. So, you know, what does that look like? Dr. Brown and her team obviously push a standard of expectation for a delivery method of instruction, and we've got to make sure they have the tools to do that. I mean, I can't come in and say do that, but they don't have the things that in order to make that happen. So, it's all good.
I think that is like, you're talking about for Rana, that is a huge like feather in the hat selling point.
I agree.
If you want teachers to come out and vote for this, like
Yeah.
the fact that they're not gonna have to pay for the
Boom.
laptop anymore.
Yep.
That is a big deal.
Absolutely. That we usually get claps and a round of applause when we say that one at the
That
campuses.
should be like a brochure by itself.
Right. So be pretty clear cut, 15 million over that 10-year cycle, and we talked a little bit of how the replacement will work, you know, every 2 to 3 years, and we already do a lot of that now. We'll just have to reallocate that and relook at how we systemize that. So C, currently that stadium, and again, this does not include the educational facility, so you can take that 35 million, you can put that on top of that, and then you can look at inflation and soft costs, and that it's probably going to put you roughly around 89 to 92 million, but currently it sets at 56. What that includes is stadium press box, kind of put some numbers here. Track and field, we know that we moved from a 7-lane to an 8-lane, all those components to be able to house UIL events, host band competitions, bring in outside folks, all the things. Lights, scoreboard, sound, really we end here, and that's our base number, but then we've got to look at that escalation, and that's where we end up. So, and I think we've spent some time, and there's obviously some pictures, some beautiful pictures here, but just to give you an idea where we are here, let me see if I can get this to it. There we go, that's better. So here's your educational center. Through the conversation with the steering committee, if you remember at one point, and I believe I showed this to you, I can't remember if we've showed so many pictures, this was all flipped. So the bowl at one point was here, and then entry point was here, but through discussion with the steering committee and trying to make sure that we honor what we've already done. And that's a big deal. We have an unbelievable Bulldog Center over here and all these other new buildings and all the things. We didn't want to not connect that into what we are essentially saying, this athletic village, to where now G Street becomes that center point. If I'm coming in off Broadway, passing LaPorte Elementary, I get this beautiful view of the Field House Educational Center. If I'm coming off San Jacinto, leaving Admin, and I'm taking that route on G Street, now I look at Bulldog Center and all that connects. A lot of the massing, the brick, and the different materials you'll see throughout this, and that gives you a really good perspective. But you're going to see the same brick component and the different structure pieces as you see across the entire complex. Really connecting and making it look like we built it at the same time. That this wasn't done at different times, right? Question?
Yeah, there's no way we can salvage the school building spot for the use.
Yes, we will be using that. More than likely, it's going to set in the front over here. That's what we're working on. We got Tim stressed out right now. Look at him. Yeah.
So which proposition is the train, that building?
This right now is in A, right? And all the rest that you see is in C. So again, I'm sorry I was getting there, but upstairs, that's your professional development educational center, right? Right now, as Doc mentioned and all of us, this is where we are. This is what we do, most of our trainings. Yes, we go in Bulldog Center, but to set that up takes a lot of manpower and a lot of things to get that going. So this is accessible all the time, ready to go and prepared for us. That's up top, again, 2 stories. At the bottom, you do have the football locker room, you've got a weight room, and you've got soccer and track and cross country and all that on this side. So, but it's not programmed specifically outside of football because of the number, right, for any specific sport. It will be for whatever we want to put in there. Every year it can change. It will be both for male and female, unisex, you name it. It will be able to support all of that. We will have bathrooms for everyone. We have made sure of that. I promise you. Yes. So press box, something a little different obviously than where we currently are. We right now have 2 of them for site, and because we're putting that footprint in the same place that our current stadium is, we put it all on one side. It obviously houses all the items that we need. You can see that the stadium itself is concourse based. I think that's important to note. It looks extremely large, but we wanted to ensure through design and working with Tim and his team that you still get that closeness that we currently get in Bulldog Stadium. But you can enter and you can walk the entire concourse from east to west. Our concession stands, restrooms are underneath that concourse. Let's see here. Another view here. Let me take you to this one. There you go. There's a little bit more perspective. So, go ahead.
I would say, does it have railings? Because I know that's one of the things.
Yes. It's all up to code. Everything's up to code. It'll have all the items that we need to be necessary and up to par here. We're looking at putting our current video board somewhere along these lines for an entry point. What we built into it right now here, let me get my perspective here. Yeah, this is one locker room and another locker room. So there's actually, we house our football here and all our other sports here, but these 2 are visitor locker rooms that can be used when we rent the facility out. They never have to touch foot into our facility, that they're able to come here, be dropped off, go inside here, and then they run out, play their game, run their track meet, do their band competition, and then they can use these areas. We've really honed in on access points to ensure that we can manage it and control it with safety. There's fencing throughout the facility. There's cameras throughout the facility. All of that is up to par and up to standard, as you can see. And here's a good look at the front end, and I'll get more pictures for when we come in front of you on the 7th, but you can see the upstairs there. You walk out, graduation as we're looking here, and you've got the screen behind it. Obviously, it's a place that's going to make a lot of memories. Questions on anything that you see there?
A question on, I guess at our last committee meeting in December, I want to say the total proposed bill at that time was around 205 million, which meant we have approximately 30 million left over.
That's right.
So if I heard you correct, you said that this new conference center is 35 million, and I believe it was 27 million back in December. My first question is, what have we done to add $8 million of value to that in 1 month?
So
where was the rest of the money going?
Right. So 27. I had on there 27, but I put inflation and it put us at 35. I took the bottom dollar off there and gave you with inflation. So it was 35. I didn't change that. what you were seeing with it being under goes back to this. So I showed it without those projects, right, when, in front of the steering committee, so that took that 164 down to whatever that was, I can't remember that number. But if we layered in these projects, which obviously, they were not included. That's correct. And I put it in, we talked about it, because that obviously is a decision we have to make as a committee, but that's why you see that money. And I went ahead and just allocated it here and making it at 235.
Each of those items, Craig, were in the initial committee meetings.
Yep.
When we did site visits.
That's right.
These weren't included in the initial
Correct.
packages.
That's right.
So after touring the facilities and seeing how deplorable the conditions were each of these.
Yes.
places, we said, we have the funds to address the conditions. Because each of these, if you go look at them and physically touch them, they need to be touched.
Yeah.
Let me ask
In a
you,
big way.
just because I have some parents reaching out to me about Lomax Junior High.
They haven't touched that gym.
How
the
old
same-
is Lomax?
Think-
1985.
Yeah, and then we did some renovation in 2010, no, so 85, yeah. Yeah, we did some, yeah, yeah,
And the gym is the exact same as it
Yeah.
was when I was there.
we've got some issues in there. Yeah, the bleachers go out onto the floor of the, they do, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, we have a plan for it.
Yeah, we do, and it'll allow us to,
The only
You know.
thing I don't see, like, on there, and I know, like, you know, it's a lot of money, but it's a finite amount of money, is we talk a lot about mental health and how we want to do things, show appreciation for our teachers. The committee talked about doing something on each campus. I feel a stupid idea of like having like refrigerators in the classroom. And that's probably not a possibility, but is there something we can do to enhance maybe the break rooms or something for each campus?
so a piece that we're working on getting quotes on right now is and these seem like they're not big, but it's the filtered water with the old Sonic ice, so you go get that yeah. So we're looking at trying to get that a part of those camp pieces. Okay.
And on the stadium piece, I think there needs to be a huge emphasis, on what it remedies. Because if you know what to look for, the condition of the stadium is
Yeah.
terrible.
Right.
And, with the footprint that we have, I think a month ago, someone posted that we were looking at permits and the discussion started, where they can put the stadium. For us to use the existing footprint, as I understand it, we have to go long.
That's correct.
We can't go out.
Absolutely.
And we can't, it's too shallow for us to go up. So we had to go, so we're not really expanding this capacity of the stadium. That's what I feel like we need to emphasize in our messaging, is making sure that the public understands, we're not adding more seats. This isn't a vanity thing. This is a necessity thing. We've got tracks that are unusable. We've got programs that can't
Absolutely.
host events. You've got falling concrete. You have no ADA
Absolutely.
rails. All the people in the front row of the ADA can't see their kids or their grandkids.
That's right.
Because it's completely obstructed. It's an old stadium.
Right.
It's very, very old. And we've got to emphasize that, and we can't get lost on this.
And that's where I think pictures.
Absolutely.
Will be a big
Yes.
role. To his point too about educating, the education center, I mean, that term is so vague. As far as the messaging is,
Right.
defining what that is,
Yep.
what's the purpose, what, to Kane's point,
Mhm.
what is that remedy?
Right.
Because education center can be a whole lot.
Sure.
I mean.
Yep.
So.
And I
David, that was just our kind of.
We've been calling it all kinds of things. Yeah, we do.
I was actually, again, I was part of that original committee when we talked about breaking that off
Yes.
into A. And the reason we wanted to is because the sticker shop with Legacy Stadium and Cajun, his offices in Allen, they presented a $72 million stadium that did not include their instructional center. So their real price tag of the Legacy Stadium was really $139 million. But the public saw it as a $72 million, and there was public outcry. So we're like, okay, look, if we're gonna get compared against these cathedrals, we need to compare apples to apples. That was the only thing. It wasn't.
She wasn't trying to, yeah,
Just point of comparison.
absolutely.
Well, let me ask you this, I mean, option A, putting it in with the stadium, C, but what's another option if we have a separate prop just on that?
I don't believe we can. No, can we? You probably know more about putting the educational facility by itself in a prop?
You can put anything in it.
Oh, okay. Well, so that's something we could look at.
Certain projects that have.
Yeah, there's requirements based off.
We could do a different prop for every single
Right.
Well, I was gonna say, if we propose that as a separate spot, and then we don't get that, then we're missing out on the locker.
Right. Right.
And then locker room.
And I'll further say some of the thoughts and conversation with Tom of, and this is going, and if all goes through and we're going to pass it, or let's just say C does fail and we need to come back, we still have the ability to build that with the space and be able to still follow through with that being an A, right?
That was the other reason.
Because we have an issue with our current field house. That is a problem.
That addresses restroom facilities for the ladies.
Yeah.
It addresses all the other issues.
Yeah.
So that's why we need that to, regardless of if Bullock Center passes them, being a stadium, we need the center to pass. We have to have the center to pass to address other issues that we were calling for the bond. We had to have remedy for those issues. We know that the restrooms in the current field house are inadequate for, and we've got complaints, we've got issues, we've got a lack of space. So that was, I think that was another part of the discussion, was trying to break that out and put it in a different bond, because if the stadium itself does not pass, we at least had the facility that addressed the issue that we
Right.
need to address in our bond. The other point, I don't know, I think I'd requested, we need to get some good pictures of the turf after a
Yes.
rain
Yeah.
and the bubbles, because that is a big issue to me.
Yeah.
And it should be to everybody
been a good
to have 4-foot bubbles out in the
Yeah.
field just floating. And that shouldn't be the case. It's a drainage
It's not about the
issue,
turf,
and
yeah.
this does address the drainage issue, to my understanding,
No, it
was that was another
Oh,
big
this will,
concern.
yes. It does.
Yes, it gets that.
And, you know, I know Ronna, and we've already kind of had this conversation about doing a video on the stadium state, because when you tour it, when you go see it, I promise you, it's a different experience, and it changes your perspective, whether you want it to or not, because it tells you its story. It was built in 1958. It's given us its life, and so, I mean, again, the goal is, do you have a need? How do you address that need? Obviously, that's a need.
And there is a need, and I know that it's commonly, you know, the rebuttal is always, why are you catering to this small fraction of kids? And my argument would be, I want to know with the total participation of that facility, between your soccer, track, cross-country,
600 a day?
your band, your chados, your cheer teams, your football teams.
A day.
Now you're looking at a huge majority of the students use that facility.
730 plus students touch that facility every day.
And there you go. And again, I really want that to be part of the message,
Yep.
because that's such an ignorant,
That's exactly right.
that's an ignorant
Yes, that
rebuttal.
includes PE. Yes, that
I
includes PE.
hate that rebuttal. And it's not. And, you know, we can stick our head in the sand and we can agree or disagree, but at the end of the day, this is an important part of the representation of our brand and who we are as a community and as a school district. And whether it's misplaced value or not, that's the fact of the world we live in. And we compete by comparison. And with open enrollment across the state of Texas, we compete by comparison, and we want to capture and retain the people that are in this community, but also attract new.
Absolutely.
And let them see what we're all about and quit being the best kept secret on the bay.
Agree. Absolutely. Anything?
A positive that I see to this design, I mean, there's multiple positives, but I love the 2 locker rooms on this end, that if we are hosting something else,
Yeah.
you think about from a manpower rental standpoint, we don't have to open up this building,
correct.
we only have to open up these things. I like that a lot.
Yep. And I mean, we're already, you know, with it flipping to G Street, I mean, we have total control if we need to have it. You know, you can shut off San Jacinto, you can shut off Broadway, and now you have full control of the facility, and you know, and you have the ability to do that, obviously.
And Mr. Bromley, while we're on this topic, obviously I've really tried to put some energy into this. There's 3. No.
Sign him up.
I don't know.
Bonnie,
There
write it
are
down.
3 stadiums, high school stadiums under construction right now that are supposed to open in 2023. All 3 of those districts have, stadiums that, exceed this. And not one of those districts is a recapture district.
That's correct.
None of them. And one of those facilities is a 10,000 seat stadium.
Right.
So I want to put that on record and,
Yep.
and make sure people understand that too.
Absolutely.
Does this stadium include back seats, or is this all benches?
Nope, it includes back seats.
Back
It does,
seats.
right here.
Thank
I don't have a good view. Again, we'll have some better views here. When you come out of that press box and you come down, there'll be the back seats there. We've got it open to go walk into the press box. Obviously, we have senior citizens who use our elevators to go up top and then come down to their seats. So we wanted to honor that, so it's still connected.
I think that's important too, because I have a lot of people.
Yeah.
Message me about the safety.
Yeah.
ADA requirement.
Yes.
And I think the back seats.
Yes.
Include that
Yep.
too.
Absolutely. And you can kind of see, there'll be the ADA pieces here. I mean, it's all built in there. It will be fully up to code across the board.
Anybody that goes out and supports our teams, we visit multi-sites
Yeah.
all year round.
Yeah.
We're in gymnasiums, and it's, as an alumni, I like the charm of Bulldog Stadium.
Right.
But we're lacking.
Right.
And our kids are being left behind. And
What-
that's what people need to understand. Again, especially if there's a zero rate increase,
Right.
or to say that, oh, we're not competing with the Joneses, okay, I hear you. If our kids lose on the field on their own merit, so be it.
Right.
But they should never be playing at a disadvantage.
Agreed.
Never.
Absolutely.
That's simple. We have a responsibility to make sure that we level the playing field and give our
Right.
kids the same opportunities as kids at KB ISD and Tomball ISD.
That's right.
All the other school districts that do that.
Right. And it really closes the door, in my opinion, because we've got this amazing facility. Now we complete it, right? And you put that icing on the cake in a sense of being able to provide all those resources to our kids.
So I agree wholeheartedly, man. I don't know, I agree with them. I would love to see, I think there's a need stadium for everything you guys presented.
Yes, sir.
But I do kind of, I don't know, I kind of tend to side with Ms. Johnson on her concern on putting that in Proposition A. Because
Right.
the way we started this bond was that for certain things that we have to get funded. Like to maintain this district, we have to get funded. That was not part of it.
Right.
Like it's a need, I'm not
Sure.
saying it's not.
Absolutely.
But my concern is if heaven forbid it doesn't pass, again, it should be a no-brainer.
Right.
Tax increase.
Right.
But if it doesn't pass, by putting it into A, like you're putting all that in jeopardy, and that's
Right.
the only concern that I have. So to me,
Absolutely.
we figure out a way to market that to where
Yeah.
it is like,
Yeah.
And Tom's gonna give us some,
Yeah, we meet with Tom tomorrow, and then obviously Thursday's critical. Yeah,
direction from experts that.
yeah, sure. Yeah,
And-
I'm not one, so,
Yeah, and by no means I completely agree with you, or you hit a home run, by the way, ma'am. It was a great presentation, and I completely agree. I just was trying to explain
Why.
how we came to arrive at A, with that,
yeah,
so.
absolutely. I hope you're proud of what you see. There was a team of people, across the district and different groups that have come in and been a part of putting this together. And I remember when I walked in the first meeting and we laid up our values. Dr. Jack spoke about who are we as a district and a community. And every time we met, that was at the forefront with what we were trying to put together. And hopefully what you see is obviously an image of that. Okay.
Real quick, yeah.
Yep. Yes, ma'am. Sorry.
Okay, I may have missed this just in so much going on. Where is home parking now? We
Right.
had that originally on this side,
Yeah.
and now there's home parking.
So, yeah, let me get over here. So there's a few things. One, we're in conversation of, do you dedicate home and visitor, right? Or do you kind of open that up? Because these entry points with the Concourse component, you can go in and walk anywhere. You're not dedicated to a side, right? So we're still kind of going through the wayfinding of that. But to kind of show you what we're looking at here, currently our field house sits here, right? We're going to hang on to that through construction till the very end so our kids can use it. And then that'll go down and that will become additional parking. You see, we went all the way to G Street, so our current practice facility that sits next to tennis will go away, and we'll build in some more parking here. One of the positives of going north is now we're going to be able to connect closer to LPE and LP Junior, and we're going to actually put a walk path and light it back here to where you can come here and be able to connect, so we'll gain more parking. But honestly, outlining the wayfinding of who parks where, we're not really fully there yet.
And we don't lose.
Yeah.
We don't lose the current home park.
No, we do not. Nothing gets lost. We're gaining more, around 200 and some parking spots, give or take.
Well, and I want to touch on that because I know personally with us, with the way the Bulldog Center is set up,
Yeah.
I think that we had some opportunity back then that we didn't
Okay. That didn't take advantage of?
necessarily
Okay. Yeah.
make the best decisions on.
Yes.
They're gonna have that
Yeah.
presence from that side,
Right,
but they have to come in from the other side.
Right.
What difference does it make?
right,
So
yeah,
just thinking about that from a marketing.
Absolutely.
standpoint, And then also a practicality.
absolutely.
Remember, we have now that new parking lot right there,
Mhm.
where the practice field is, but we also have where the band practices, that's still a parking lot.
Yeah. Yeah, we're not taking it.
And how many additional parking spaces?
Yeah.
So I think it's 200 plus, give or take 200 plus additional parking lots.
When we have an event at Bulldogs
Yeah.
Center, everybody's parking everywhere still.
Right.
There's not.
Yep.
Not enough.
Even where bands are.
Well, and that's right, I mean,
On any given Friday, and I, in my 2.5 years here during football season, let's just face it, very clean parking lot.
that's right.
I hope somebody doesn't come after me for it, but that's additional parking over there. A member of our committee suggested that we just use it as a domain and schools. I said, we can't do that, but we use that, and to this point, we haven't had anybody to kind of veto that. So, that's parking.
Yeah. So we're adding some, we'll never get, and Chris, Mr. Murdoch is right, we'll never get to the point of, getting what we need because we just don't have the space to do it. But we are going to gain some. I think the idea of connecting to the other two sites and kind of pulling that, that whole experience in will benefit us. But we will need to identify the wayfinding and what that looks like. And we'll be upgrading that throughout the entire complex because we have a lot of old signs out there and we'll be kind of, updating what that looks like and so forth. But the ability here too is it's flexible of you being able to go in and kind of move around the facility. But I understand your point.
Yeah, as for visibility,
Yep.
like you said,
Yep.
Bulldogs Center just got hidden back there.
Yep.
So just making sure that we're adding
Absolutely.
more visibility.
Absolutely.
So the building on the north end,
Uh-huh.
that is what now?
This here? So we're still trying to figure out the name. I'm gonna call it Educational Center because that's what we've been calling it. But, so below here, you have on the right side, you've got the football locker room space here, coach's locker room and so forth. Here you have a weight room, and on the left wing here, you've got other programs, soccer, cross country, track, and so on and so forth. Above, the entire second floor here is a professional development teacher training facility. The capacity is around 450. Again, that can be one large open space where you present to all of those individuals, or it breaks apart and partitions off into 5 different kind of pockets or pods.
Professional development when we come back to school.
Yep, LPU, chamber luncheons, Rotary, all the different things, yeah. Banquets, oh yeah, student groups, all of that can be a part of that.
And how about that we also, open it up for, like, getting to vote on the name of it? Like, we can present names to the community and they can vote on it. In honor of something.
Yeah, yeah.
But I mean, could we open it to the community and kind of give them a little bit more?
Well, there is some propositions, so they have to be, in that way first.
We have a local policy. But, I mean,
So I love this idea,
Yes.
the community needs, like a space like this.
Yes, sir.
I don't know why I didn't ask this before, like, will we have some sort of a kitchen, that has to be a full industrial kitchen, will
Yeah.
there be a space
Yep.
for like food prep service?
Yeah, absolutely. It has everything you can think of in it, absolutely, yep. Yeah. Mm-hmm, it will be able to do whatever you need it to do, absolutely. Yeah, great question. Okay, anything else here before?
I have a statement, if I could.
You got it.
Ms. Johnson, Mr. Witt, pleasure to have you on our team. It's great. I deal with, in business every day, and, you get somebody else on your team like that ups our game. Great presentation. I think it's gonna be a great partnership, so looking forward to working with you. And hug me.
Y'all ain't new. Y'all been here. Okay, so, yeah, so this goes back to the original, component there with the 3 propositions, and, so we set at that 2:35 mark. And lastly, right, we have that committee meeting Thursday. We're gonna fully outline what all this lands and what it looks like, and then we'll be working with, bond counsel to get that language and that election order to put it in front of you on February 7th, okay? All right, Doc, you want anything?
I'd like you to now go ahead, tomorrow, and let's go ahead and share this presentation with the board. I saw the taking pictures, so I know we're gonna share.
Yeah, we'll get it.
this presentation, I'd like the board to have that.
Absolutely.
But I'd also say, first of all, thank you to, Dustin, y'all give him a hand.
Oh, yeah, that ain't me. That's all these people, all my people.
And Justin, Lori, and Coach, and all of you that have helped to make this happen, there's been a lot of people to get to this point. When we talk about this bond, Board President and trustees, I said several times today in the meeting, this has been 18 months. This has not been yesterday. We started talking about this a year ago, and the board said, Jackson, pump your brakes, son. Slow it down. Well, you remember the end? Y'all said, slow it down. Pump your brakes. Yeah, slow it down. Slow down and chill, man. Take a chill pill. And so this has been an 18-month endeavor. This has not been a couple of weeks. And so we thank everybody that's been part of the committee. There's still so much work to do. I too am very thankful to Tim and to Bonnie and to Lana and to all of the folks that have been a part of this. Most importantly, I'm thankful to the board for giving us the permission to pursue the excellence. Okay, and that's a t-shirt there, we'll make out from that. But we're pursuing excellence in every way. But what we wanted to do tonight is give you a comprehensive, thorough, deep dive into this. And still yet, you can ask us anything you want for the next few weeks, because we want you to be settled in your spirit. February 7th. We want you to be settled. We want you to feel comfortable. We want you to feel like I can go out and smile honestly and help promote this bond because I believe in it. And again, I said to the board 18 months ago, 2 years ago, it's my job and our job to present the issue and to present a solution. It's our community's job to answer that call. And we believe that we can pull it off in a big way. But at the end of the day, it's all about the value set that we have. What do we want to be known for, and what do we want our future for? I wish, and I am going to do some research, and there's still a few folks here that have been in this building for many, many years. I'm going to do some research on who was on that board, and do they have relatives still alive when they built the very first Philadelphia? Because their legacy is still alive. Isn't that something when you can say you voted on something and you made a decision about something 65 years ago, plus years ago, and we're here talking about how are we going to move from that legacy to another? Because that legacy never dies. Whatever you do with this board on the 7th, and I know you know this, it's your legacy. It's the legacy of the future for the kids. We will not be around in 65. Well, some of you will be around, but not all of us will be around in 65 years. But the legacy will be there. And if the history books will say, somebody took a chance on the future. We took a chance on a brighter future for our students. And that's all I'm going to say is, look, it's all about what are we doing for the students and the community at large. And I appreciate the board for investing in me the confidence and the trust to pull this off. We don't agree on every piece of it, but I think many of your issues have been answered tonight. And I believe by the 7th, all hearts and minds will be clear, and we can get that 7-0 vote and move forward if that's your pleasure. And so thank you, David, and thank you, board, for everything you've done.
Just want to echo what Dr. Jackson just said. Thank you, Mr. Witt. Thank you, Ms. Johnson, and thank you, Huckabee, and thank you for all the staff that have been involved, and Dr. Bromley, and all the staff that have been involved with putting this presentation together. And with that, we'll go to item 7, action on closed session items. We don't have any, so we're going to adjourn at 8:42 p.m.